With respect to presenting the case that we charged, one of the central challenges was trying to present that in a concise way because we did have so many witnesses. Some of the most powerful witnesses were witnesses who, in fact, were fellow Republicans who had voted for Donald Trump, who had campaigned for him, and who wanted him to win the election. These included state officials, people who worked on his campaign, and advisors. There were witnesses who I felt would be very strong witnesses, including, for example, the Secretary of State in Georgia, who told Donald Trump the truth, told him things that he did not want to hear, and put him on notice that what he was saying was false. Our investigation revealed that Donald Trump was not looking for honest answers about whether there was fraud in the election. He was looking for ways to stay in power. We had evidence that the president had directed Rudy Giuliani, one of his co-conspirators, to contact members of Congress to try to further delay the proceedings and exploit the violence that happened in the Capitol. We had evidence that those calls had happened. We wanted to get more evidence of that to corroborate it for trial.
Hey, with us now, let's bring in Republican Congressman Kevin Kiley of California. He's a member of the House Judiciary Committee, and he questioned Jack Smith in yesterday's hearings. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. I greatly appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I wanted to ask you, we're going to get to Jack Smith in a second. I just want to ask you a couple other things that we've been talking about today that obviously I know you hear from your constituents. And if you don't, tell us, because that would be very instructive for us. But first of all, obviously, the Epstein files keep coming up. They've been coming up for a very long time. And it's been MAGA supporters, it's been Republican supporters who have really pushed for that for some time. Should the Justice Department do more to release the 99% of those files that have not been released? And what should Congress do to expedite that so your constituents can see them?
Well, of course, we need to get the files out as required by law. I was one of the first people to come out in support of the bill, at least on our side of the aisle. And I said all of last year, what we want is maximum transparency consistent with the rights of victims. I understand this is an incredibly complicated matter, millions of documents, incredibly sensitive, matters at issue. So I hope that this will proceed in an expeditious manner. We can get the transparency and truth that everyone wants here and the closure for the victims, and then we can move on from this.
And is there a time frame for you, like at some point, because obviously they were going to have a rolling release of it because of the very concerns you're talking about, but we're past a month and they've only released like 1%, and a lot of those were redacted. Do you have a timeline in your mind, or are you hearing from constituents? Hey, what can you do, Congressman, so we can see all the Epstein files?
I certainly have heard from a number of constituents over the last year. I'm not sure that's the top of mind issue right now. A lot going on in the world. I think, ultimately, it could come down to a court handling the process as far as the timeline goes. It's complicated by the fact that there's new documents being discovered. So what I'd like to see is the files come out as quickly as possible, consistent with protecting the very important privacy and victim interests at stake.
Yeah, I love talking to members of Congress. I was one once, and I loved knocking on doors and hearing, you can tell after you knock on like the fifth door what issues are top of mind.
That's right.
Talk about what issues you're hearing when you go to town hall meetings, when you're knocking on doors, when you're talking to your constituents. I know affordability has to be up there, and I wanted to ask you, what should Congress do? What should the president do on health care, on groceries, on rent, on first-time homebuyers? But what are you hearing from constituents in your district? What is top of mind for them?
Yeah, cost of living is paramount, especially in California. I represent a district in California. We have the highest cost of living in the entire country in California, highest cost of housing in the continental United States, highest gas prices, highest electricity prices, highest taxes for many people, close to the highest water bills. So this is a very top of mind issue for people in California. A lot of that, I believe, is a product of state policy, but there are things we can do at the federal level as well. And I think we have seen progress when it comes to energy. We have seen real wages now that are outpacing inflation for the first time in quite a while. We had significant GDP growth. in the last quarter of this last year. People are going to be seeing tax relief coming soon. But undoubtedly, affordability remains a major challenge for many people across every sector and every policy area. So I think absolutely I was a supporter of trying to extend these lapsing subsidies while including important reforms. I think there's still an opportunity for a deal there. I'm also the chair of the subcommittee that deals with childcare and education issues. We just held a hearing on the cost of childcare, which has just gotten extreme for many people across the country. So we're working on solutions there as well.
So one final thing on affordability, and it's vexing for me, and I'm sure it is for you. You're a Republican. I am now an independent, but I'm still a small government conservative. Really vexing problem along with health care, which for me, I fear the federal government is going to have to get a lot more involved in that and figure out how to bring prices down. But one that's really vexing to me is housing. And it's vexing because when my generation grew up, I came from a very middle-class family, and yet I was in my first home at like 26, 27. People that are growing up now, coming of age, having really good jobs, can't afford that down payment, can't afford their first house, sometimes until they're in their 40s.
That's right.
Owning your own home after you came back from World War II, whether it was in Levittown or Manhattan, Kansas, that was the American dream. What can conservatives do? What can small government Republicans do to help bring down those prices without so radically skewing the market that you don't end up with something like we had in 2008?
Yeah, great question. And the simple answer is we just need to have more housing. And the premise you just described is absolutely correct. The cost of housing is both the biggest component of the lack of affordability in many places in this country, as well as you described, sort of the linchpin of this ideal of the American dream, being able to have your own home, which is increasingly out of reach for so many people, especially in my state of California, where we have the highest housing costs in the entire country. And so what we've seen in California, for example, where the governor came in saying, I'm going to build 3.5 million new units, and he's overseen less than 20% of that during his tenure, is you just have too many barriers in the way of building housing. You have frivolous litigation. You have a law in our state called CEQA. You have some other laws that exist in other states and at the federal level. You have fees that make it so, you're spending $100,000 in some cases more before you even break ground on the project. And so things get delayed and delayed and delayed, and it just doesn't pencil out. And this is true for those who buy. This is true for those who rent. And it's the reason for the problem that you described, which is that this is just becoming so far out of reach for so many people.
So let's talk, just for fun, about something we completely disagree with each other on, and that would be Jack Smith. You kept going back to sort of the same line with him, the same criticism of him, and that was that you thought he was arrogant. You didn't think he showed enough humility, which I want you to get to. I am curious, though, the one thing I didn't hear so much about, actually, from Republicans yesterday, were attacks against the actual charges that the grand jury found the president, that they indicted the president on. I'm curious, why do you think he was arrogant? What do you think he should have done differently? And if you don't mind, after you answer those two questions, how do we break this sort of cycle of lawfare? If Donald Trump and Republicans hated lawfare, you look during the meeting and Donald Trump is sending orders over Truth Social for Pam Bondi to engage in lawfare, I think, if I have my timing correct. How do we break that cycle? And you can get to Jack Smith first, but then talk about breaking the cycle of lawfare so we're not doing this when, like, every new administration comes in.
Yeah, so with respect to Jack Smith, I approached this hearing for what it was. It was an oversight hearing. It wasn't about adjudicating the underlying issues. Of course, you can't do that when there's only one side that's present. But Congress has oversight authority over, this function of a special counsel. And so what struck me with him, and I've seen two other special counsels come in since I've been on the Judiciary Committee, Robert Hur, who was appointed by President Biden's administration, and John Durham by the first Trump administration. And with both of them, there was this element of humility and restraint. They understood the sensitivities that they were dealing with. They seemed to make measured decisions about about how to proceed. With Jack Smith, what you saw is that he continually got pushback in the way he conducted his investigation from not just, Republicans on Capitol Hill or something like that, but from judges, from district court judges appointed by both Republican and Democrat presidents, from the D.C. Court of Appeals with, I believe it was 3 judges appointed by Democrat presidents, from his own attorney general, who by the Washington Post reporters reported that he raised First Amendment concerns with the way Smith went about doing what he was doing. And the fact that he seized the phone records of members of Congress and then got court orders so they wouldn't find out about it, and then didn't even tell the judges that these were members of Congress he was asking for orders on, so the judges wouldn't be aware of the underlying constitutional issues, separation of powers, speech or debate clause. I thought that was all troubling. I think that there's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle who found those sort of things troubling. So that's why I focused on how he conducted this investigation and what reforms might be needed to protect rights going forward. As far as your question, about how do we kind of move on from this cycle, I agree that what we need to have as our sort of guiding star is equal justice under law. And when you get into this cycle of investigating the investigators and then investigating those who investigated, at what point could go on ad infinitum. And so I do think that that is a cornerstone of the way our country is set up, and we need to make sure that that guides our actions going forward.
Congressman, good morning. It's good to have you on the show today. So you're talking about some procedural concerns you had, and you expressed those and many others members as well. But I'm just curious, taking a step back, assuming you thought January 6, 2021 was a terrible day for the country and the attack on the Capitol. To your great credit, you were a 10th grade English teacher, I believe. How do you describe that day, if you could, to your students? What would you tell people about what happened and who was responsible?
Well, it was, of course, a horrible day in our country's history. I taught 10th grade English quite a while before these events, so I never dealt with that.
I know.
But,
what would you tell them? Yeah.
I think that, of course, you'd want to recognize that violence, that breaking the law, those things are absolutely never acceptable, and that we're a country of laws, and that we, have processes in place for how our political system is supposed to work so that the will of the people can prevail. That's how democracy is supposed to function. Now, I think that all of those questions weren't really what yesterday's hearing was about. We're talking about events from 5 years ago now. But I understand your question, and I think that at the end of the day, I think civic education is something that we need to do a better job of in this country. I've noticed this for quite a long time, is that we don't prepare young people today. We don't equip them with the tools that they need for the sort of citizenship that our founders envisioned, where we all play a part actively in determining the destiny of our communities and our country.
And in telling the full story of that day, would you tell students that Donald Trump bore some responsibility for what happened?
I've always subscribed to the view that you shouldn't tell students what to think. You should equip them with the tools.
Just teaching history, though.
And so
yeah,
I think that if you're a history teacher, of course, you'd want to make sure that you cover the events of that day, which was a terrible day and a moment in our history that I'm sure will appear in history books for as long as we have a country. And of course, students need to be presented with all the facts so they can reach their own conclusions.
So you've made it clear then you do not assign much blame in terms of the president's behavior that day. We can shift gears now. Let's talk about what we heard from the president overseas in Davos, Greenland. Yes, to be sure. He also talked about an economic story. He put it a success story. But so many Americans aren't feeling that right now. Poll after poll, we talked about it at the top of the show. The New York Times Siena poll that he's underwater on issues like the economy. He's also underwater on what arguably would be his signature issue, immigration. Do you feel right now on that alone, the ICE raids, the way we're seeing the immigration operations being conducted in Minneapolis these last few weeks, is that the appropriate way to deal with this issue?
Yeah, I saw that poll, and I've heard from constituents as well. I mean, I think that there is broad support for immigration enforcement, and I think the polling that you just cited actually reflects that. For deportations, especially when it comes to those who have committed crimes, those who pose a threat to public safety. There's also broad support for the reality that we have a completely different situation at the border now than we had in in recent years when we had, millions of people who were entering the country without authorization. I think people are troubled in some ways by some of the images you're seeing on TV. And so, I think that there are a lot of voices on Capitol Hill and within the administration as well that are thinking about how can we make sure that we're doing is focused on what's going to make the biggest difference. And, I think that top of the list, again, is making sure we're focusing our resources on those who pose a risk to public safety.
Yeah. So, Congressman, we earlier today, I talked about a Washington Post report that I found absolutely fascinating because when I first ran for Congress, it was there was the looming shadow of, and you're so young, you probably weren't even born when these happened, but Ruby Ridge and Waco in 1993. And that's where the federal government, obviously, were you born in 1993, by the way?
I was born. I remember these events. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so we can at least talk about these events together. But those events supercharged the Republican Party, the conservative movement, and you had people talking about property rights, the sanctity of their home. It's why the Stand Your Ground laws, I think, came into effect after that. I'm curious. What I'm trying to get to here is there are a lot of ways the Republican Party, my old Republican Party, has changed. I think there's some ways that it hasn't. And so I want to ask, are your fellow Republican members of Congress, especially from more rural districts, are they concerned about scenes out of Minneapolis? And yes, I'm not just talking about the protesters, but I'm talking about the federal ICE agents and breaking into homes without judicial warrants and the shooting of a mom from the side of the car that likely now killed her. Do you hear from Republicans? Is there still that sort of strain of libertarianism and that suspicion of federal troops, federal agents going too far? And is there a feeling that maybe that's what's starting to happen in Minneapolis?
Well, I think that, yes and no, in the sense that, first, I think the overall scene that you just described is probably pulling from, particular examples and generalizing. I think that when you look at what ICE is doing on a day-to-day basis, and our federal immigration authorities more broadly, you have incredibly dedicated men and women who are in very dangerous jobs, who have faced vilification, and who are carrying out a constitutional function, and a statutory function, as every president has, at least in our country's modern history. And so I think that sort of attacking the foundation of what they're doing, which, President Biden, President Obama, and their predecessors all, felt was an important part of their jobs. We shouldn't be doing that. We certainly shouldn't be directing animus towards the dedicated men and women who are in these public service roles. Now, is there a function or is there a place here for saying, okay, maybe we should be focusing first and foremost on those who pose a risk to public safety, and we should be making sure that we're doing this in a way that is respectful of the attendant communities. And you talk about rural areas, we should make sure that we're not compromising the ability to have a functioning agricultural sector as well. Many members of Congress have raised that issue. So this is all a legitimate part of the debate. But I think that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we do have a much more secure border right now, and that we're in a much better place in that respect than we were over the last few years.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's been my argument from the very beginning. The president can declare victory on the southern border because it's far more secure than it has been in a very long time, at least since Barack Obama's final years as president, but I think even more secure than that, and that was the most secure it had been in 50 years. But yeah, that and going after the worst of the worst, I think that's what voters wanted the president to do: secure the border, go after the worst of the worst, right?
Exactly, that's right.
All right. Republican member of the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Kevin Kiley of California. Thank you so much. If you're a Rams fan, good luck this weekend. We're going to see.
They're the one remaining California team, so sure.
Yeah, might as well. Coming